Welcome to Battles of Faith. We're your host, Ivor and Atante Myers. We're continuing our series today on the entertainment industry, but today we're specifically talking about video games. Listen to this. Playing violent video games like Doom, Wolfenstein 3D, or Mortal Kombat can increase a person's aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behavior, both in laboratory settings and in actual life, according to two studies appearing in the April issue of the American Psychological Association's Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Furthermore, violent video games may be more harmful than violent television and movies because they are interactive, very engrossing, and require the player to identify with the aggressor, says the researchers. That is deep to me, because to say that it could actually be more dangerous than violent movies or violent television programs, I never thought of it as they're actually doing the violence, the person playing the game. So it only makes sense that it could actually be worse than watching somebody else doing it. They're doing it.
That's right. One of the words, a couple of the words you mentioned in there are striking, because it mentions that this, the video game industry, or video games in itself, can have an effect upon the thoughts and the feelings, or the emotions is what I believe you said. And we've seen in other programs that those two things combined, the thoughts and the feelings combined, make up the moral character. So here you have a secular source, and what was the source of that anyway?
It was the American Psychological Association.
Okay, the American Psychological Association saying that video games can actually have an effect upon our characters, basically. And so this is an issue that is really taking the world by storm. Video games have exploded upon the scene, and I mean, young people all over this planet are becoming more and more engrossed in video games, even so more now than movies and music, which is amazing.
It's true. It's taking up so much of their time. In other shows, we mentioned that young people are playing at least 7 hours of video games, and probably even more now in a week, in a 1 week period. But I want to say that in this program about video games, there are so many adult men who are very addicted to this program. I was talking to someone the other day who just said that's all my husband does once he comes home from work. It used to be, okay, all they want to do is watch sports or sit on the couch and watch the news or whatever. But that's all she said he does. And then he even made the comment that this is the only thing that makes me happy. And she was so taken aback by that. She was like, well, what are me and the children doing here? But the point is that it's so addictive.
Right.
And it's not just for young people.
Right. Let's look at one of our definitions on this program today, because you mentioned that one of the reasons they said this was so dangerous is because it is interactive. So let's look at that word interactive. The word means this: acting or capable of acting upon each other. Now that's amazing, Atante, because what interactive means, and in the context of video games, is this: it not only means that we have the ability to act upon the game, but the game also has the ability to act upon me.
Wow.
You see? To act upon my character, my thoughts, and my feelings. And so while we call the name of this program today the Game of Death, okay? So while we are playing this game, we don't realize that the enemy of souls is playing a game with our souls, and we're calling it the Game of Death. And again, people look at it and say, well, you know, it's just a game, but the fact is that it has actual, it is capable of acting upon the thoughts and the feelings, thus forming our character.
That's right. And I know that we'll be talking more about this later on in this program, but I don't understand why parents allow their children to play these games where their children actually have to do the killing and have to do the aggressive fighting in the video game, where the Bible, you know, is clear, especially about killing. Thou shalt not kill. So why should we practice on video games?
Right. Well, you know, I think we'll find the answer in Genesis chapter 3, and we invite you to open your Bibles with us. We're going to take a look at Genesis chapter 3, and we go here quite a lot because there is so much packed in Genesis chapter 3, and especially in light of the subject that we're dealing with. But I want to share something with you in particular in Genesis chapter 3. We read here this story again of Adam, or rather of Eve, and her dialogue with the serpent, okay? And God tells her, don't eat from this tree, and the serpent comes and says, it's all right, you can eat from the tree. Now, one of the interesting things about this, Atante, is that the serpent was talking, okay? Why was the serpent talking? God did not create a serpent to talk.
That's
so
right.
This is one of the things that attracted Eve. How is it that this serpent is talking? Well, it's assumed that this serpent, he's hanging around the tree of what? Knowledge of good and evil. And he's saying, Eve, listen, eat from this tree. Nothing's going to happen to you. I think it's safe to assume that the serpent himself had already taken from the tree and said, hey, look, or pretended that he took from the tree and said, hey, look, nothing's wrong with me.
That's what I imagine when I think of that scene.
So watch this now. There was a demonstration of evil. Okay, now I want to focus in on that theme for a moment. I want to put the word up, demonstration. What does the word mean? Demonstration means to present by experiments, examples, or practical application, to explain or to illustrate. Okay, so this is what Satan did. He knew that Eve would not have gone out and ventured out on her own to do this evil, so he had to first give her a demonstration. Okay, now what did the demonstration do?
It made her think that, oh, look at him, he's fine, nothing happened to him.
That's right. The demonstration rendered evil harmless. You see, so once Eve decided in her mind, well, God told me not to eat from this tree, but according to the demonstration that I have seen, there's really no evil here. The serpent isn't harmed. The tree looks good for food. And so what that demonstration of evil did is it broke down Eve's resistance. It broke down her barrier to evil, and in this way she was deceived. In this way she was lost. And I want to suggest today that the same thing is happening through these so-called video games. They are demonstrations of evil, and because they're only what?
They're
Demonstrations. Parents and people see no problem with it because it's not the quote-unquote real thing. It's only a demonstration. But we need to understand that what the demonstration does is it says in the mind of a young person, oh, what I am doing here on this video game killing is not evil, because the killing is only happening in demonstration mode.
And I think all the parents of those children who actually committed the crime and did school shootings never would have thought that the video games that they purchased and allowed their children to play and participate in could have actually trained them to be killers. That's right. They didn't think, you know, they just thought, hey, this is what young people are doing. It's innocent, it's fun, it keeps them at home. But, and I'm not saying that this is the only thing that contributed to these children's school shooters, if you will, high school shooters, to kill these people, but it definitely, in every case, the research shows that they were all participating in these violent video games.
That's right, that's right. Well, think about this, Atante. A lot of times, and again, we've traveled, and sometimes I'll go to churches, and I'll see young people in the church with their video games.
With the little Game Boys.
With the little Game Boys, and they're just, you know, and I'm looking at them going, wow, you know, here we are in church, and their minds are consumed. I've had parents call me or email me and say, my child is locked away in his room. He will not come out. He will not take breaks. He is totally, totally, totally addicted to the video game. What can I do? And again, I know for a fact that these things started out innocently. At first, 20 minutes, then half an hour, then an hour, and it keeps going and going, and the addictive factor is there, just like we've seen in all our other studies dealing with sorcery. Anything that medicates the mind so that it will not follow the will or the law of God, and we see the same is true in the video games.
That's right, and we've even had older parents call us for their adult children who are married with children and call us and say, you know, can you please pray for our son? He's 30 years old and he's addicted to these video games, and it's taking him away from his wife and his children, and he can't seem to break away with it. But I want to say this, that I know that it actually does take a certain level of skill to be very good at these video games. Mm-hmm. And so Satan is training a part of the mind that God would want to use You know, if we could use that part of the mind and studying the word and using it to teach others and show people how to be drawn closer to God, I mean, what a blessing that would be.
That's right. Well, one of the things, Atante, that makes a video game so attractive is that it provides a fantasy realm. And that's one of the reasons why people think, oh, this is harmless, because it's just a fantasy realm. I think gamers call it the, the virtual realm, okay? And this is supposedly that virtual world where you can go in and do all these things, play all these games, you know, do all this killing and all this violence, and it really not count. But I want to throw some more words up on the screen. I enjoy looking at words because when you study the origin of words, you find out that there is more behind the scene than what we understand. So let's look at the word fantasy for a moment. And we'll put it up on the screen. You'll see there the word fantasy, which we spell as F-A-N-T-A-S-Y, was originally spelled P-H-A-N-T-A-S-Y, fantasy with a P-H. Okay? And the reason why the word fantasy, we'll put fantasy now on the screen. This is what fantasy means. It is imagination unrestricted by reality. Okay? Well, that doesn't sound so bad.
Right.
But let's take that word a little further. And if that word fantasy looks familiar to you, it's because it also comes from the word phantom. Phantom. Okay, well, what is a phantom? I don't have to read the definition to you, but you'll understand. We're going to put this word up on the screen. The word phantom is this: a ghost, an evil spirit, something sensed while having no physical reality. Okay, so let's put these things together. When we talk about a phantom or a fantasy world, we're talking in reality about a spirit world. We're talking about a world where we are dealing with not flesh and blood, but against what? Spiritual wickedness in high place. Now you say, oh, come on, you know, you're telling me that what I do in my fantasy life actually counts? Well, remember, Jesus was having a discussion, I believe it was on the Mount of, the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
And he said something that was absolutely astounding. Here's what he said. He said, you have heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you that if you look after a woman to lust after her, where?
You've committed adultery in your heart or
That's
in your
right.
mind.
In your mind, you know? Or we might say in your fantasy life,
Right.
you are still guilty. In other words, the law of God penetrates even into the fantasy realm, the spiritual world, even into that place where we have our own private thoughts and feelings, so that if you do the act, even in the fantasy realm, Christ said, it's still as good as sin.
So when we're playing these video games and we have to kill this person and that person to get to the next stage or the next step, that is still sin in God's eyes?
You know, think about it like this, Atante. Many people out there, there are a lot of men out there that struggle with pornography,
Right.
okay? Now, they may not be in the act of physically committing adultery, okay? But they're looking through these magazines. Now, Christ deals with that very issue, and he says, look, if you're imagining this thing, you may not even be looking at a magazine. You may just be in your own fantasy life imagining these things, and Christ says that even there the law of God penetrates, so that it is written in the books of heaven as sin, as evil. And so the devil says, hey, you know, it's just a demonstration. It's just fantasy. But Christ says, no, not so. In fact, Atante, you'll realize one of the reasons. In fact, let's go to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6, and some of you may actually already know this, and some of you may not. But there was one reason why the people in Noah's time were destroyed, and the Bible gives us that reason. And you'll be surprised. Look at what it says in Genesis 6, verse 5. The Bible says there, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every, what, Atante?
Imagination.
Imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, I'm sure they didn't have video games back in Noah's day. Maybe they did, I don't know. But what the devil understood this principle of providing a fantasy or an imagination realm in which men felt that they were comfortable. Men were deceived into feeling they were comfortable enough to feeling that, hey, if I sin in my mind, if I think evil in my mind, and it's not actually done in reality, it doesn't count. Now, what happens is that once it is committed in the heart, it will eventually and naturally play itself out in action. Remember, this whole battle of faith is about keeping our eyes focused on Christ. It's about getting our characters to reflect the character of Christ. It's about getting our image, changing our image from the image of ourselves into the image of Christ. And the enemy does not want that. He wants to divert the mind so that the heel itself will be diverted. Remember, we said that God's mission for the church is to bruise the head of the serpent, according to Romans 16, verse 20. Well, Satan knows that. What controls the heel? It is the mind. And so he says, if I can get into their mind, I can divert them or amuse them, as we saw the word amuse means to divert. I can amuse them and distract them so that they will not fulfill their commission. And again, this is one of the ways in which the devil seeks to do that. This is one of the ways in which he controls our character. He creates this illusionary world and says, it's all right for you to sin here. The law of God doesn't reach here. It's all right for you to kill in this realm. It's all right for you to commit adultery in this realm. I was reading the other day, Atante, there are pornographic comic books. Now, I'm sure that no parent out there would allow their children to read a pornographic comic book.
Right.
And they wouldn't say, well, it's just a comic book. It's not real.
It's just fantasy.
You know, it's just drawings on a page. It's just fantasy. They would never say that because pornography is taboo. But now when it comes to killing, which is part of breaking God's law, just as adultery, or any other thing like that, then all of a sudden it becomes okay.
And the amazing thing to me, again, is that video games didn't start here. They didn't start like Mortal Kombat. When we were children, Atari came out.
That's right.
And there was Pac-Man, and you just ate the little dots on the screen, and you needed to get to the little energy thing so that you could, well, I guess so, you had to kill the little monster thing that's after you. But it didn't start as bad as it is now. And so Satan, again, has just started something off really innocent. He's allowed it to take about 20 years or so, and now it is to a point where it is very bad. Matter of fact, there's even video games that they don't just have killing, but there's women that appear on the screen and they're half-naked women. The purpose of them, I don't really understand. I don't know if you win, I guess the woman appears or whatever.
Pornographic video games. I have a friend in Australia who actually mailed me some information on video games, and he's done a lot of research, Stuart Mazaferi. And we've been in contact, and I mean, there's some of the things he's been sharing with me about where the video gaming industry has gone is just absolutely mind-blowing. And the sad thing is that so many parents don't see it. And again, it is infiltrating, I mean, like I said, young people in the church. Satan is sending out this flood. And again, we've been saying this in a couple programs. It seems like is this picking out a straw, video games? This is not a straw. This is a flood. And we see it in the churches. We see it in the world. The enemy is flooding the minds of young people with so many things that it is impossible for them to keep their minds focused on God.
And it's only for one purpose, and that is so that it will not follow the will of God, or won't even think about following the will of God.
That's right. We've been talking about imagination, and I'll tell you something. If you read Isaiah 26 and verse 3, and we've mentioned this text quite often, that will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on her mind. If you look in your margin in your KJV Bible, you will see the word imagination.
Right.
Thou will keep him in perfect peace whose imagination is stayed on thee. And you'll notice the similarity between the word imagination and image. Imagination and image. Through these images in the video game and through these images through the media, what the devil is attempting to do is he is appealing to the imagination, because he knows that it is through the imagination. Whoever has the imagination has the heart.
Right.
You see? So if the devil provides this atmosphere where he says, hey, let your imagination run free, unrestricted. But really unrestricted means unrestricted to the law of God. You see, then he knows that he can have the imagination, and just as those in the antediluvian age, Noah's time, were destroyed because Satan got a hold of their imaginations, it's the same thing he's doing now. Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. And we're seeing that the imaginations of men's hearts are only evil continually. Atante, I remember the story, reading the story of how Harry Potter came into existence. Mrs. Rowling was on a train riding one day, and she says, Harry Potter, she was sitting there on a train, she says, Harry Potter just walked into her imagination while she was on that train.
Right,
and she called it, you know, it was a spiritual experience, you know, an invigorating experience. She just got this idea that just popped into her head, Harry Potter. Now, I would ask, where did that thought come from? You know, I think it was a thought bomb from the enemy.
That's right.
And so from this woman's imagination, she begins to put this stuff down on paper. And then through her imagination, these books that she has now written have gone all across the world, and through one woman's imagination, literally millions. In fact, the next Harry Potter book is coming out, and they are printing 10.8 million copies for the first printing, the most ever in this country.
Wow.
You see, and so the devil is after the imagination, and through just the imagination of one person, look at what damage he can do. Now think about this, Tante. He's got the imagination of the entire Hollywood elite at his fingers.
That's right.
So all he has to do is inspire and say, okay, this is what I want you to do. All right, I want you to make this video game. Okay, I want you to do this. And it just goes out. Mass media. Think about this, Atante, and you listening out there, watching out there, think about the warfare that is going on between media and meditation. Those words sound alike, don't they?
They do.
Media and meditation. Both have to do with what goes on right here. We are no longer wanting to meditate on God and His Word because the media is taking control of our lives. The media is flooding our minds through all these different things. And because of it, when we close our eyes to pray, and we don't see any video game illustrations, and we don't see any explosions, and all we see is darkness. The mind can't, it's not used to that. It doesn't want to be in darkness, and that's why we just don't want to sit and pray.
It almost seems impossible for that mind to do that, because to meditate is to sit and to be calm and to speak to God and hear His voice speaking to you. Where if we're gamers or training our mind to play these video games, it's just not what the mind is used to doing. It's constantly like moving and thinking. I read an article that was actually supporting the gaming or video game industry, saying that it's actually helping children to be able to be good problem solvers later on in life. And at the end of the article, it was talking about all of the millions of dollars that industry is making. So again, it's the love of money is the root of all evil. It's
That's right.
huge, they have these big, not conferences, but they pack these big arenas to display all the newest video games and have people come and try them out because there's so much money there to be made.
That's right. I can imagine someone listening or watching and saying, but it's just a game, it's just a game, it's just a game. We've got to remember that the devil is making this, the devil is playing the game of death for our souls.
Right.
And he will do it in any way that he can. Once we have the battle plans and we see the depth to which the enemy is going, we throw our hands up and say, Lord, if you don't come in and do something supernaturally in my life, if I don't have a supernatural connection with you, there is absolutely no way that I can escape this assault that is upon me, and that's really upon the whole world. We've got to get connected with Christ in a supernatural way.
And again, a supernatural connection with God can only happen through prayer. And when we train our mind to just constantly be moving and jumping and whatever it's doing when you're playing video games, it is so hard to concentrate during prayer. You cannot make it. I mean, people can sit down and play video games for hours and hours and hours and hours
And can't
and
pray
cannot
for a
pray
minute.
for that, and cannot pray for a minute or 5 minutes.
Right.
There's a problem.
Right.
There's a problem there.
Right. Is it just a game? I mean, you know, my purpose is not to try to prove that video games have evil in them. I think everybody knows that. You know, it would be, you know, for me to go, look at that evil and look at that evil. We know that the real issue is, does it count? Does sin in the fantasy realm count? And Christ clearly answers the question. That ends the argument for me, because the Word of God says, if we sin even in our imaginations, if we imagine evil, you know, and again, thou will keep him in perfect peace whose creative imagination is stayed on thee. Atante, I think of Isaiah 30, verse 21, something you just said earlier. In Isaiah 30, 21, the Bible says here, and thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, this is the way, walk ye in it, when you turn to the right hand and when you turn to the left. Christ says, I am going to direct you in this battle of faith. I'm going to direct you. I'm going to speak to you. You're going to hear my voice. And I'm going to be able to direct you. Because remember, we can't see. We've got to see by faith and we've got to hear by faith. You remember that we said in earlier programs that the definition of witchcraft was to whisper a spell.
Right.
Well, you know, the enemy is bombarding our minds with all these voices from the video games and from the music and from the media for one purpose only, so that we will not hear the voice of God directing us, saying, this is the way, walk ye in it. Right.
We have too many bombs and explosions going off in our mind that we can't even concentrate and focus on hearing the voice of God.
That's right.
And Satan thinks that he's so clever.
That's right.
That's why I feel like this program that we're doing is so important. This whole series is so vital and very important to understand, because hearing the voice of God is life to the Christian. It gives spiritual life.
That's right. And God tells us in the book of Isaiah, he says that it is in quietness and rest that we shall be saved. You see? And so the devil says, I can't give these guys any time to be quiet. I've got to bombard their minds and just come at them and flash the Hollywood lights and all these different things, so that their attention spans will decrease. They will not be able to hear the voice of God because too many voices are going on in their minds. And in doing this, they will not be able to keep their imagination stayed on him. Neither will they be able to hear his voice, the Holy Spirit speaking to our hearts. And right now, I think that some of our listeners and some of our viewers are hearing the voice of God saying to them, you need to come closer to me. You need to move these things out of your life and allow me to enter into your heart. And this is where the Lord wants us to go, and I hope you respond to his calling.
That's right. Well, we're all out of time. We do thank you for joining us. Please don't miss the next program. Until then, God bless.